Thank you very much. My family and I enjoy them thoroughly every year, so thank you.
How are you?
My family doesn't get to see them. I don't think I'm in Carolina. That's exactly right.
Rhonda has the funniest story. I think that the funniest one is everybody should ask me about.
I will ask her. We were talking earlier about things that people bite into and lose crowns.
That's a good one.
The law firm we work with a lot, they sometimes bring this popcorn thing around, Fabian Medcott. And Dr. Ronenkamp bit into one of those, and the kernel of popcorn was still there. Just broke one of his teeth right in half. He said, that's the most expensive Christmas popcorn I've ever tuned into.
Bonnie, this is where you are.
Yeah. I know I'm actually participating.
Congratulations.
Yes.
Bonnie, we're live.
And
All
I was telling you,
right.
it's right on you right now. It's actually on you right now. See?
Oh, my heck.
So is my microphone working? All right. Welcome to our board study session. Today is November 6th. What is today? 17th, November 17th, 2020. Let's start by indicating who is here. Start with Terry.
Terry Bodden.
Todd Zenger.
Connie Burgess.
Martin Bates.
Nicole McDermott.
Connie Anderson.
Chris, are you with us? Do we have Chris Nguyen? Are you on mute, Chris?
Oh. Yep, I am. Now I'm on. Chris Wynn.
All right, there you go. And Karen Winder. We also have with us tonight, now that the election is officially certified, we have board member-elect Clark Nelson from Precinct 2, and board member-elect Julie Jackson is online with us from Precinct 1. She's waving to everybody. So congratulations. We also congratulate Nicole McDermott for her win. And she was unopposed this time. So, but it's still official today, and we congratulate her. All right, with that, we have a few items on the consent agenda, which isn't typical for a study session, but sometimes purchases and things like that need to be approved. So I will entertain a motion.
I move that we accept the consent agenda.
I second.
Right, we have a motion and a second to approve the items on the consent agenda. Board members, any questions or concerns? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion passes unanimously. I'll now turn the time over to Martin.
Thank you, board members. Many of you will remember, was it 2017? There was the Dawn and Ben show, or the Ben and Dawn show. It went back and forth, and we had spent a couple of years, several years, working with the board to develop a long-term capital plan, which would ultimately involve the model and replacement of all of our buildings. Interest of taxpayers, pay as you go. Oh, there was a pun there. It's cheaper for the taxpayers to have pay as you go rather than to pay interest on loans. So I'll say it again, in the interest of taxpayers, we're working towards a pay as you go method, but because the way the timing of schools was working out, we needed a kickstart. And so the bond was a kickstart. We worked on this for several years to develop the plan. Then the Dawn and Ben show took that plan to the public in many, many meetings. It was a lot of meetings. And then ultimately the election was held in 2017. And that was for the bond specifically, but the bond was just a part of that plan. And so we thought, as it's been a couple of years, the bond proceeds are just about used up themselves, that we ought to talk about the plan in its entirety and the implications of that, and come back for an encore of the Ben and Don show, if you will. So Ben, it looks like you've got computers in front of you, whichever the view, go right ahead.
All right, I'm trying to run this presentation at the same time, make sure that our meeting is working online. So thank you for letting us come and share some of those things that Don and I so fondly remember, our long nights together back in 2017. He fondly remembers them much more fondly than I do. That being said, we did pass a bond that year. It was a great year. We had a lot of great community support and help, and wanted to kind of go over and remind ourselves just a few quick things in advance of that. There's a quick video here that we put together as part of that presentation. Once, if you remember, we did an extensive January, February, March of that year public input campaign where we actually helped the rest of the community know and understand the challenges that we were faced with $1 billion infrastructure problem, and some of the options that were available to us in terms of how to repair our buildings, and then also how to finance those things. So this video, once we did that survey to determine what the public wanted to do after a series of those public meetings, we came back in the middle part of that year. And this was the video that we utilized once we agreed we were going to pursue a bond at that point in time.
Your Granite School District Board of Education.
I don't remember how to do this.
Has made some important decisions that will affect the
Everybody hear
future
that?
of our community schools.
Nope.
Yes.
Now there's a sound thing I've got to do here.
Sounds like Chris could hear it online.
Here we go. True digital and should be the same.
I'm like, what is that noise?
Your Granite School District Board of Education has made some important decisions that will affect the future of our community schools. How did we get to where we are now? Let's take a look at what's happened so far. Earlier this year, the district hosted open house meetings regarding the current state of our school buildings. These meetings were hosted in every community throughout Granite School District, and all residents were invited via direct mailers, newspaper ads, social media posts, and websites. These meetings detailed how our schools are not keeping pace with 21st century learning, and that under the current budget for capital projects, the majority of our school buildings will age more than 150 years before being rebuilt, even though outside engineering experts have shown that our schools should have a lifespan of only 60 to 70 years. From here, the district conducted a survey to determine how the community felt about the plans that were put forth. The feedback from the survey showed the most support for a hybrid model of financing capital needs. This would include an initial 10-year, $237 million bond, after which the district would maintain tax revenue for the years ahead. Using the feedback from our community and knowing our responsibility to students, families, and taxpayers, the Board of Education moved forward with a bond initiative to be placed on the November 2017 ballot. This plan is designed to meet the needs of our students by providing facilities that accommodate 21st century learning. It's also designed to be responsible to our community through a finance model with the least amount of impact to taxpayers. Please learn more at gsdfuture.org.
So as you can see, I apologize for those viewers at home. They're still seeing the wrong screen. So I'm going to actually end this show and start this over so they can actually see what we're seeing. Sorry, there's some technical expertise here. Just making sure that's working.
Your Granite School District Board of Ed.
Nope, still doing it. I apologize. We practiced this like 6 times. Like, we really need to do it a 7th. I'm gonna try this way instead. Yes, I think that's finally working for the online audience. I apologize. Sharing the right screen. They all look the same to me, so I apologize. That being said, and thank you, Leslie, for texting me and telling me that it was not working. So that being said, here's a summary of some of the things that we went out and discussed. We discussed several different options in terms of how we would approach rebuilding or renovating our buildings. So you can see what those options were here. We indicated in those materials the board's preferred option at that point in time in terms of what we would like to do with respect to those buildings. And then we addressed, more importantly, and what we're here to discuss a little bit more in depth tonight, how we would finance those plans. We discussed a single tax increase, which you can see down here would have been roughly $260 on a $250,000 home. That was the average price of a home just 3 years ago. By the way, that's gone up almost $100,000 in the last 3 years. That being said, we talked about a series of bonds every 4 to 5 years, knowing we need to go back out and request the same amount and do these large campaigns every few years. And then we talked about a hybrid of both, where we would initiate a large bond to kickstart, as the superintendent indicated. And then we would come back, and as we were paying off that bond, we would raise our capital revenue that would show as a tax increase at that time. But at the same time, we would be having no net tax increase. So while we were reducing our debt levy by paying off that bond, we would come back and increase our capital levy to offset that cost without actually raising taxes. But to the public, and in accordance with state law, that does look like a tax increase. The one that we would anticipate for this upcoming cycle would be roughly $208 on a $350,000 home, which is roughly the average. So we're going to get back to that in a little bit, but I want to turn the time over to Dawn to kind of talk about how that rollout is working with respect to the actual plan itself.
Dawn, before you jump, everybody up to speed? We all there with what Ben's just told us?
Could you go back a slide?
Go back to this. So the thing was just to raise it high, the series of bonds, that's kind of the Davis District model, because they're always building. That's a strategy that districts that are growing fast like to use. And there's one series of bonds retired. I just issued one. Or the hybrid, again, a kickstart. And then let me say, Ben, make sure I heard you say that right. So the voters authorized us to sell those bonds, and then the board set a tax, a debt service tax. And there's the capital outlay, the regular tax. So the idea was then, as bonds get paid off, that we would lower the amount of debt service tax and raise the amount of capital tax to be the exact same number, so that the tax rate on a home doesn't change. But the law requires us to, the net rate doesn't change, but the law requires us to call that a tax increase.
It's actually a little trickier than that.
All right, go ahead.
We authorize a debt, then we service the debt at a certain rate. When you levy property taxes, at the end of the day, the district gives information to the state and we say, hey, we need this much money. Then they go calculate a rate based upon the assessed values that are out there. So when Ben confused us by saying, by the way, homes are worth more, we're not going to apply that same rate to those newly valued homes. We're still going to ask for the same dollar figure. So you pay the same rate. That $208 that Ben's talking about is the number that we would then just ask the taxpayer to pay. and they set a different rate. The higher the value, the lower the rate. So did that confuse everybody even
We will
more?
still collect the same amount.
Yeah, the impact to the taxpayer is as debt service goes down, capital comes up, and so the same dollar figure is what they pay each year. And
I have a question. Oh, sorry, Don.
no, go ahead, Chris.
Okay. So how does that look when people get their tax statement or their property tax statement? Is it going to look like a tax increase? Is that what we're worried about? Or is it going to look like the same amount that's going to the district?
So that's where it gets complicated and how detailed folks look at their tax assessment. State law requires that we advertise this in our budget session as a tax hearing for a tax increase. At the end of the day, if you pay careful attention to your tax dollars, we're not asking for any more tax dollars, but we are required by the state law to advertise it as a tax increase.
So to what you're saying though, Chris, as we're raising that levy, it is essentially technically considered a tax increase, even though reducing taxes on another portion. So yes, it will show up.
So it's
that
confusing, but okay.
So when we get our tax, it looks, so it's divided up rather than just going to Granite. It's going to show what goes to Granite as well as capital on our assessment.
It'll show three granites. It'll be the normal M&O tax, the capital, and the debt service.
Okay.
And if you just were to look at the dollar values on capital and debt service and total them, they're going to be the same total.
Right. So if we did that math, it would be okay.
Yes, but it is
Okay.
super confusing the way state law has us advertise stuff.
Gotcha.
But be
I also had a question.
Thank you, Don.
I'm wondering, so when we actually do this tax increase, I understand that it doesn't actually increase how much tax anyone's paying, but it is a tax increase. Is there a time on this tax increase in which it goes back, the tax goes back down, or is this like we've made a?
Yeah,
I mean,
so is
the time?
on the campaign asking about how the patrons of the community wanted to pay for capital expenditures, a single tax increase model, a series of bonds model, or the hybrid. They came back with the hybrid for a couple of reasons, and I will answer your question towards the end of this. The first is if you just did the tax increase, you had to save for many years so you could afford the new high schools and. And they said, oh, well, why don't we bond while interest rates are low and build some high schools really soon and a couple of other schools. And then you keep the dollar value you're asking for us constant into the future so we can continue to build and renovate our schools. So the public made I think, a very well-informed discussion and decision and said, we understand that to get all of this capital done, you will be taxing us in perpetuity to deliver on this capital plan. And so there's not an intent in this to slow down that capital levy. Did that answer your question?
Perfectly. Thank you very much.
I want to reiterate something Dawn said there that's really important. We actually surveyed the community after extolling all the virtues of these options, and they supported this hybrid model. They knew we would come back and raise their taxes at some point and offset that with the decrease in taxes as we paid off this debt from these bonds. That being said, it doesn't offset the concern that people's memories are really short. And so when we go back into the spring, we're going to talk about this a little bit later on in the presentation. We're going to have to really help people remember that they said that we could do this and that we were actually keeping our commitment to them and we're not actually raising their taxes.
So are you working on a plan now to be able to take?
Yeah, and you're at the heart of that, Terry. I'm going to take you around with me and
Well, all right.
we're working on that.
Yeah, so on the next slide, we wanted to, and a lot of you, if you've been anxiously paying attention to our prior meetings, go ahead, Ben, on the slide advance, please. Thank you. This shows,
Could I ask you and everyone else, I'm getting notice that we're not loud enough, so please make sure we're speaking clearly into our microphones for the audience at home.
so this phase rollout intuits a little bit of how the transition from a bond to a pay-as-you-go capital model will be working. And you'll notice that we took out a very short mortgage, if you will. The bonds were to be paid off very rapidly. And so if you're looking at the bond revenue line, you'll notice by 2022, it gets very, very small. It went from tens of millions to a couple 100,000. Next slide, Ben. And as we progress, you'll notice in 2023, that bond revenue disappears. And by then you've switched that tax rate all the way to the capital levy. And one more slide, Ben. Again, concentrating on that capital revenue line, you'll notice we were sitting there at 35. Well, that's us paying off bonds. Then suddenly at 2030, all of these bonds start to retire in their entirety. Boom, boom, boom. 2032 is the capital revenue that keeps going. And so that's our cash flow. And we base the remodels and the rebuilds on our ability to stay positive in our cash flow. Some years we'll build, some years we'll save, and then build a few years after that. So it's a cash flow management option, just like you do in your own household finances, right? You save up and spend to do your capital improvements. So that's how this system is running. And you will recall from an October meeting and a November meeting, we talked about how between a robust Utah economy, specifically in the construction sector, and all these different trade tariffs and et cetera, really turned the construction market to hot. And we had to slow down some of our construction because they priced us out of it. So this model is reflecting, and that's what a capital plan is meant to do, to pro forma these things out, to model these things out and change with the times. And so right now, Ben, if you'd go to that next slide, I will go one more. This is depicting that depending upon the school and based upon our best cost modeling since tariffs and the hot construction market, we've seen that 5 to 7 year delay in some of our projects. And so the models are still reflecting that. That's still the plan going forward as we switch to the pay-as-you-go model. Are there any questions and refreshers on this? 2017 was a long time ago. So it's really important we start to think back and use this as a foundational touchstone as we go forward on our capital plans.
I just want to say, I do remember whoa, that echoes. Okay. Hopefully you can hear me without the echo. I remember we did actually, this drastic climb was a little bit unforeseen. It caught us by surprise as far as how fast the cost would rise, but we did put in a little buffer of what we thought things would cost by the millions. I just want to reiterate, we did give ourselves what we thought was a pretty good buffer to be able to still pay for these things, but those construction costs took off farther than we.
Yeah, no, we really did. We had some conservative cost models going and conservative financial models by our advisors. We never would have expected a trade tariff war. That caught us by surprise. I think that one, I feel comfortable in saying, boy, I never would have foreseen that. The construction cost increases doubled about what we would expect to see on an annual year-to-year increase. Some of that was labor. Some of that was the fact that Utah is just running a very hot construction market. Big projects greatly impacted that. We're anxious to see what the future holds. Right now, we see things that the numbers, the price increases are still there, but you get more bidders. Soon, you would expect that more bidders means lower pricing, but we haven't seen that in the market yet. So you're right. We tried to be conservative. I never expected my home value to go up by, I want to say 80% was the last market news that I got on my house. It's not that nice of a house. I'm very confused, but it's in the cost that we're seeing.
Yeah, it's just nice to mention that because I think some people look at this and they're obviously frustrated because they see their school on the list and they
Yep.
have a year pegged and then all of a sudden they find it's 5 years delayed. I understand the frustration. I just want to explain the reasoning and that we did try to foresee a little bit of that and build that into the plan, but who knew these tariffs and all these extra construction prices? And so I just wanted to make mention, we did try to anticipate some of that.
It's super challenging. Even the economists that were predicting, oh, well, we'll start to see a market slowdown in, I remember, it's going to be in 2019, third quarter, 2020, first quarter. No, it's just not materialized appreciably. So my team would rather build than not. And so this is pretty crushing for us as well.
Yeah. Nicole, did you have or I see your hand, Clark. Nicole, did you have a question? And we'll go to Clark.
Yeah, just really quick. I just want to clarify, because we do have another bond that's expiring, correct?
The last series from our bonds from 2008 to 2012 are 20-year bonds, and they finalize in 2032.
Okay.
So we're actually sunsetting this latest round of bonding, Series 2, before we're sunsetting Series 1.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that because I thought that was interesting. I guess I just remember incorrectly because I thought it was a 10-year bond as well before. So I thought we would be seeing that, but that's why. Okay, thank you.
All right, Clark.
Will you elaborate on the 5 to 7 year projection and what its basis is?
Yeah, go ahead, back a slide. No, back another slide, get me into my cost models. It's all about the bottom line, the cash flow input. And so they're delayed. So you see phase 1 rollout, Ben. You see positive cash flow going. So go next slide. Ben? No. Slide 2 on the cash flow rollout, please. There you go. So you'll see the cost inputs are above. In 2023, 24, you're starting to see high schools paying themselves off. And then in 2026, you're starting to see other projects come in. All we're doing is balancing expenditures out and cash flow revenue down below. And to keep those positive, you had to delay certain schools between 5 and 7 years, or you would go negative.
And how are you projecting the outflows that are 5 to 7 years out in terms of those costs and the inflation?
Escalated greatly since the originals. Originally, you would escalate in a 5%, and we've gone up from that. So we've started our real world costs where costs came in during the tariffs and our current construction, and we've escalated on top of those. So we had a rapid jump from, I'm going to call it an $85 million high school to well over $100 million that happened overnight before the bond was even closed.
Right, I get that. If that happened in the past, I'm not talking about the future.
I've taken
$40 million high school today. What's it going to be in 5 to 7 years?
escalated at 6.5% per year.
How much is there?
6.5% per year. And that's higher than the latest construction industry index has told us. I don't believe them. If we're still staying hot, we're going to go up at that level. So we've tried to be conservative, escalating out in the future.
So what you're saying is that the budgeting that you've done for future buildings is based on these escalated construction costs of today, plus inflation.
We've taken 2018 and 2019 and 2020 hard bid numbers and escalated those in our model.
So what you're saying is this is kind of a conservative model. And in the end, if things go down and they look better, some of these may be able to be pushed up, but we're kind of making sure that what we show the public is like, worst case scenario. We don't want anybody's hopes up. Is that right?
We're trying to be conservative. We're trying to that our crystal ball is good for about 3 years. I'm not going to say that we're super accurate. It starts to get really cloudy depending upon what's going to happen in the build cycle here in the state. But for 3 years out, we're feeling more comfortable. 5 years out, we start to get a little nervous. 10 years out, no one in the construction industry right now feels comfortable projecting that far out.
I would just reiterate that I remember Don saying that back in 2017 too. My crystal ball gets a little cloudy after so much time. This is still a 40-year strategic plan, and based on conservative estimates, we knew there would be ebb and flow, right? And so the philosophy is still sound, and we feel comfortable with the adjustments we've made, as you can see here, that Don just went through, that we can kind of get things back on track the way that we had originally envisioned. That being said, in order to make this work, according to the commitments that we have made, there's some steps that the board needs to take. That being said, there's some promises and commitments that we've discussed in other meetings that I want to remind the board and other members of the public who may be watching this about as well. When we were in those meetings, there was this notion too, what are you going to do about those buildings that you don't need anymore? Are you going to rebuild some of those buildings that you don't need anymore? And as you recall, this board's had to make some difficult decisions over the last few years with respect to some of those facilities, and we've closed 3 schools in the last year alone. So I just want to remind you that we have another presentation coming up in the next few months with Davis Demographics, who's going to be coming back and making some additional recommendations with respect to the decline in population that we're seeing in the district as a whole, not just because of COVID, but obviously with respect to birth rate and some other things. So that's there, and I wanted to remind us about that. As far as it stands, we anticipate needing to hold a tax hearing this summer, shifting funding from debt service back over to the capital levy. And this will appear again as a roughly $208 tax increase on a $350,000 home. We need to do a really good job starting in January to educate the public that something like this is coming down the road so that they know and understand the commitment that the board made to our 40-year strategic plan and how this will impact them financially, particularly in the light of the pandemic. I think people are very concerned about their pocketbooks, and we want to reassure them.
Well, and the message will be it's a $208 increase for capital at the same time as there's a $208 decrease in debt service. And so we'll need to help them see that net. But what we'll also remind them is the plan is the plan that it is. The bond money is now, we keep talking about the bond as though it's the bond money's done. Bond money's just about all spent, will be over the next couple of months. Any construction that happens thereafter is going to come out of the capital fund. And the capital fund right now doesn't have the money in it to do what it is that we've said to do. But if we follow through on the plan that we talked about in 2017, that we're reminding everybody about in 2021, this is going to work. The first phase will be a little delayed, but then the sequence really ought to move forward.
Yeah, come and speak into the mic. Clark's going to ask a question here in a second.
As the debt service continues to go down.
Why don't you just sit right there?
That's fine. I'll come over. As the debt service continues to come down over time, as certain bonds are retired, does the law set that we have to have one of these tax hearings every single time that adjustment takes place?
Yes.
So this is going to be an ongoing communication that we're going to have to make to the community and help them understand and remember that we're just simply reiterating the commitment that we made to them back in 2017.
The question, let me make sure that I know the answer to the question. Really, we're going to need to be having one of these tax hearings every summer until 2032, when the last bond is retired. And so the last bit of debt service is shifted to capital. You're nodding, so I understand that.
That's a fairly accurate statement, yes.
What other questions? Julie or Chris, do you have any questions?
I did.
Oh, go ahead, Julie.
Chris, thanks.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I totally understand all of the things that have been unforeseen about this, and I appreciate so much all the work that you guys have done. I don't want to my next question to look like a critique. It isn't. I just wonder if there, it's just such a horrible thing when you just have to kind of put yourself in there to luck, and we've been unlucky. But is there anything like for future lessons learned that we can pull from this? I don't know that I can even myself see anything that we could have done to have shifted this problem or seen it in advance. I'm just wondering what your feedback is on that, since you guys know more about what's going on than me. If there was a lesson learned from this.
I think the one lesson that I always watched for in this, we knew that construction trade labor market was going to tighten. A lot of older folks that have trades experience, they're retiring. There aren't enough young folks coming in to replace them. Did we, along with our advisors and those in the construction industry, underestimate that trend? In hindsight, I think so. That was a challenged lesson to learn. The trade war and ensuing tariffs, when we were doing this bond in our initial pro forma models, no way, wasn't even on the radar screen. That one was a surprise to us. It hit almost every element of the construction materials side that we were looking at. So that one, it's been very unfortunate and hard to cost manage. We did model in what we thought would be the normal amount of square footage being built, both in government institutional buildings, retail and commercial. That exceeded our market projections by a bit. I think anyone driving through Lehigh and Utah County could easily see that was burning a little hotter than we thought it would. That being said, the airport finished a little earlier. There were some things happening downtown that startled us a bit. The models were pretty decent, but no, the hot Utah economy surprised us. We thought it would have flattened out by now, and we're still seeing challenges in moderating the bids. Let's just say that.
Great question, Chris. Did you have any more questions before we move on to Julie?
I just had one question about the tax hearings. So if we have to do those every summer until 32 is what you said, are they the same thing every time, or what do those, tell me how those work? Because we have to do it each summer.
Yeah, what happens is every June 1st or so, we have to publish a budget, a preliminary budget for the public to review. And then we hold a budget hearing. Now, if part of that budget hearing in June involves a tax increase, which it will, then the county actually schedules when the tax hearing has to be. And so that's typically in August, I want to say. We've held those in August. And we post those and we publicize those through the statutory means. And then that evening we have the budget hearing, and the budget hearing starts, and we're in the room that we're in now, and anybody who wants to come address the board regarding the budget comes and addresses the board, regarding the tax increase comes and addresses the board regarding the tax increase. We, just as a practical matter, we typically have a stack of papers for applications for tax relief for people on fixed incomes, because we often hear from people on fixed incomes and we say there's actually an exception for you, and here's the paperwork, we can help you fill that out, and they're generally grateful for that. But those go on then here in this boardroom, Chris and Julie, and when those are over, then the board considers what they've heard from the public and considers what they've thought, and then adopts the tax increase or does not adopt the tax increase. And that's what it looks like. That's the process. So in June, a preliminary budget is adopted, and in August, there would be a tax hearing.
And to be
Thank you, Martin.
To be clear, just to add on to that, Martin, it is a tax hearing, which is considered an open hearing. So as far as, we listen to as many people want to come up to the microphone and speak with us and give us their opinion. And so it's not like some of our other board meetings where they have to sign up for public comment or whatever. It is actually an open hearing, and we just, whoever chairs it opens up the hearing. We listen to as many people want to speak with us. We close the hearing, and then the board discussion ensues.
Oh, thanks for explaining that. Okay.
Ani, did you have a comment?
I just have a question. So how long has this rule for the tax hearing like that been in place?
I think what you're asking me is a shift from debt service to capital.
Right,
That-
how
that-
long have we had to do that with a tax?
That law has been in place for many, many years. So even though as a taxing entity, you think of that as a shift, the Taxpayers Association and consequently the laws see that as a tax increase. The theory being, once the bond's paid off, then that rate could just disappear.
Oh, okay.
And so if you take that rate and rather than letting it disappear, which would be a tax decrease, you instead move it to capital, that's actually a tax increase, even though the dollar amount coming out of your tax notice stays the same.
Okay.
I would
Julie.
point out,
Oh, sorry, Ben.
I would point out in our pre-bond meetings, we visited with several private organizations such as the Taxpayers Association, explained this process. We did not have any opposition from some of those groups with respect to what we were doing, but it was indicated at the time by a particular state senator who was no longer a state senator that he was not
Still affiliated with the Taxpayers
correct,
Association.
that he would his personal option was just a series of bonds. He recognized our capital problem, but he wanted us to have to come back and ask the taxpayers every time. The tax hearing does that with some respect. It's just a little bit different modality, as it were.
Thanks for that, Ben. Julie, haven't forgotten about you. Do you have any questions or comments?
I did have another question. If this needs to be something that is taken offline, then that's just fine. But I'm looking, for example, this is your slide number 8 that shows the phase 1 rollout, the projects, and you've got rebuilds and remodels. And on the remodels, I'm just wondering what the process is that you guys have gone through in order to determine what needs to be remodeled in that building. Or if that's it, or if we've just kind of said, generally it costs this much to do a remodel on this many square feet of building.
So you've asked two questions. One, what do we fix? And two, how do we model that? The first item is we use our analysis on the facility condition index that we've done. So before this plan ever started out, we went out and we had a bunch of architects, engineers, and others look at the condition of the buildings, tell us what's in good shape, what's failing, et cetera. And we put that into a live system that tracks the age of certain components. So let's say your air conditioning system is designed to last for 30 years and it's going to wear out at a projected date of, make up a number, 2030. And so that would be on our target list in 2030 to remodel. So we look at, when we go in and remodel a school, we make a presumption that we're going to take care of the physical facility so it can continue to not deteriorate. We re-energize it. We will visit some aesthetics, paint, things of that nature, flooring, but we also visit the latest teaching technology. So it's the physical ailments of the building, some aesthetics and usually lighting to make a better engaging learning environment, and that technology. To predict in the model, we estimated based upon, it's usually X dollars per square foot to cure the ills of a building. The one thing that presents a challenge in the model is seismic stability of the building. That's the greatest unknown, because when you do that latest, greatest analysis, that's our biggest variable, is understanding the seismic stability of the building and how much additional steel or other elements that we have to add to protect it. So other than that, our estimates are based upon square footage.
Hey, Julie, on the slide deck that we provided, there's actually some extensive peripheral materials that we provided to the public in terms of options of different types of remodels, approaches we would take as we were soliciting feedback on this process back in early 2017. There was, it's called option 1, option 2, and option 3, and it talks about the different types of things. I can get you some additional materials if you're interested in reviewing how that process went.
I'd love to see that. I think that my question comes down to really two issues, so maybe it will help you to know what information to send my way. One is that, like, so of the buildings that you have already used this money on, I have toured Evergreen Junior and Rosecrest. And both of those, I saw in addition, well, both of those say rebuild. And when I think rebuild, like I think Skyline, which is also says rebuild. But what happened there was not necessarily a rebuild. So I was like, wait, what does that word mean?
Those should be remodels. They were never identified in the first rollout as a rebuild.
Okay, so that was just written incorrectly on there.
Labeled, Julie.
Okay. And then the second thing was that when I went there, my constituents, they don't see the HVAC that's changed or the lighting that's changed. What they see is like a whole new faculty workroom that they think doesn't work and that they feel like was not money well spent, or they see new changes to an office that was not quite the way that they thought it needed to be, or they see these kinds of remodeling situations. And I know that is all going to come up when we do this tax, when we inform them or remind them about the tax change. And I want to make sure that I know how to respond to those questions well. And that if there have been mistakes made, that we can own up to them, or if they haven't been made, then we can explain them. And so those are the concerns that I wanted to
Yeah, we'll probably
about maybe offline, I guess.
You and I probably just have a series of Zoom calls or meetings, and we can take you through some of those. That's probably.
Thank you. I think though also that we're all going to need to answer those questions, and so we want to make sure. Maybe I'm the only one who is not educated about that stuff, but thanks for your help, Dawn.
All right, board members. Any other concerns or questions regarding this long-range plan? All right, I just, want to say thank you. 2017 was an interesting year. Ben and Dawn, I think, put in more hours than anybody. I went to a lot of
They've just about used up their comp time.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, but I attended a lot of those meetings, so definitely not all of them, but they were actively out in the community gathering that critical feedback and input, because this was a big deal. This bond passing was a huge deal for Granite. It's provided us, even with the delays, it's provided us a pathway to take care of our buildings and ensure that the capital needs are in place so that learning can take place within the walls of those buildings that we're trying to build, so to speak. And so appreciate your work, your continued work on this. So thank you.
Can I ask one more question, Karen? I'm so sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I just, I know that everybody is a little bit heartbroken over what for Taylorsville. And I just wonder if there's anything that we can do to get them. Is there any, creative accounting or something that we could do to get them their wing sooner? Assuming I know that they have not yet reconfigured, but assuming that is probably coming. Is there anything we can do for them?
To build their wing, increase capital even more coming in June. There's no creative accounting. Money is money. Debt leverage is a ratio that we prefer not to spend everything, because troubles always come up. But we are looking at, instead of a row of 17 relocatables, there's a relocatable system that we now have in place at the relocated Westlake campus, where it's a hallway with classrooms off of it in a relocatable fashion. So we'll try and make their life as bearable as possible, something innovative that way. But outside of a large capital injection to move that forward from that deadline, there's not much else we can do.
So we would have to actually go out and get more money from the taxpayers, which we could not do at this point.
We could ask him for it. I don't know that it would be wise.
Yeah, I agree. I just want to think through the options, you know?
Yeah, no, I think you're on the right track as far as just trying to think of all angles.
The board has considerable, I've said this to board members a lot of times. Connie's starting to know. What makes a Board of Education different than the Lions Club or the Kiwanis Club? If the Lions Club or the Kiwanis Club wants to take money out of their neighbors' wallets, they need to ask for it. You can do it without asking for it. And that's a sacred responsibility. That's a real big public trust that they gave you when they elected you. The Board of Education of Granite School District, because of the way that we have financed our district for decades, many decades, has considerable headroom, which is not the technical term, in the capital area, and not as considerable, but some headroom in the M&O area as well. You have the ability to actually raise taxes, where what we've talked about tonight is just a shift, which is tax neutral when you're doing the net out on your tax notice. If the Board of Education chose to actually increase taxes, you could generate additional revenue, which could accelerate all kinds of projects. But there are reasons that there are elections every 4 years, either to encourage or discourage the use of that taxing authority and that power that's been invested in you.
Could I just make a point with respect to the Taylorsville reconfiguration? That very point with respect to the wing was brought up multiple times as part of those meetings. And I don't believe that they were deceived in any way, shape, or form, that they knew that they would not have that wing in place despite pushing for implementation next fall. So that was kind of a known issue as well. So I think we can respect the fact that they knew that it was going to be a bit of a sacrifice on their part as well.
I think you used the comparable. Hunter High School did the same thing in their reconfiguration. They knew that it would be 5, 6 or so years before they would have a new wing, and they would make do in a relocatable village, is what we called it. They had 17 relos out there. This is very comparable to the process that Hunter engaged in. And I think the students, incredibly adaptable. Teachers adapted, did well. And I think Ben is correct that Taylorsville will experience much the same.
And what the two of you have just said is true. It's absolutely true. It's also a pain. And that's if there is a way to accelerate that at Taylorsville, we ought to explore it and then either accept it or not accept it. And I think that's what Julie's asking for. And I don't know, Julie, if you can see a lot of people nodding here, but that's what Nicole and others are doing as well.
All right, great question. Anything else, board members? Clark, Julie? Good. Okay, thank you once again for all your work, Ben and Don. Okay, next on our agenda is a superintendent report, but real quick, actually, I forgot something. There is tomorrow night a board member Zoom call. I don't know if it's Zoom. There's a video call with Gary Edwards for all interested board members. This is open up to any board member from Salt Lake County. It is going to be tomorrow, 5:30 to 7, isn't it? Is it 5 to 6:30? Where's the information on that?
Obviously, I didn't.
Okay, it's in my email. I will.
5:30 to 6:30.
5:30 to 6:30. Okay. If anybody didn't get that invite, will you let me know? We'll make sure to get that out there.
Is there any chance it'll be recorded?
Yes, it will be. Also, I got notice that the new board member training for December 5th is going to be virtual only. So we'll reach out to Julie and Clark on that.
I think
Stacy, did you already send that information out to everybody? Or to board members?
We got it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Chris. And Clark, did you get that as well? Perfect. Okay, those are really the only items of business I had to make calendar-wise, make sure board members knew of. So, and you don't have a report? Say again.
Sorry, it's 5:30 to 7.
It is 5. I thought it was an hour and a half, 5:30 to 7. Yeah. That's what was kind of throwing me off a little bit. Okay. If there's nothing else, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
A motion to adjourn.
I'll
Second,
second.
All right. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All right. Thank you, Julie and Chris, for joining us online this evening. And thanks, Clark, for being here tonight.
And Julie, if we called you
Thank
Chris,
you.
we called you Julie, sorry about that, but thank you. Thanks, you guys.
No problem. I hope that happens more often. It's like makes me look